So we're talking maybe 20,000 soldiers of the legion class in Syria. 20,000 soldiers in Syria. How many legions in Palestine? You want to take a guess? Probably none. Since Syria was in such immediate control, the legate controlling the prefect or the procurator in Palestine, it doesn't seem to be the case that there were any legions in Palestine. Perhaps 3 or 4 in Syria, probably none officially or permanently in Palestine. Of course, in using those words, I just clarified myself a little more. They could be there on occasion, depending on the circumstances, what would dictate that. Over a period of time, the word legion, and I mean by the time of the first half of the 1st century A.D., the word legion had come to mean nothing but a large number. It was synonymous with a large number without being technical as far as how many we are talking about here. The word occurs 4 times in the New Testament. However, it never appears in the capacity of a Roman army division. In other words, it's always more or less a metaphorical use of the term, the developmental aspect of legion, where it does not refer to a Roman army. It may refer to 6,000. Some of these it may not necessarily refer to that. Okay, let's look up these cases 4 times. You remember what the 4 are? What do they deal with? Demons, someone said. Okay, 3 deal with that. What does one other case deal with? He refers to legions in what context? Angels. 1 time as angels, 3 times as demons. Never as Roman soldiers. Isn't this interesting? Matthew 26:53. Now you better say it's interesting, because I more or less got job offers while I was gone. Now I just will go back home tomorrow. Chapter 26, we need to get the context here. Here we're going to look at, it's the first case in the Gospels, but it happens to be the only case that refers to angels, so we will look at this. Verse 52. They've had this little nasty episode of someone taking off the ear of the servant of the high priest, and Jesus said, "Put up your sword. Those that take the sword will die by it. Thinkest thou not that I can pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels?" Now I said that legion by this time came to mean not only 6,000 men in the Roman army, but just a large number. Like we say maybe oodles. What do we mean by that? 6,400, we mean lots. Lots in the circumstance of whatever it is that we're discussing here. But when he says 12, he obviously has reference to the Roman setup, the Roman division. So probably he's speaking of the 6,000. So you multiply your 12 by your 6 and you can see how many angels he has reference to here. 12 legions times 6,000 of angels. How then shall the scripture be fulfilled, that thus it must be? So he's talking about, 100,000. Of course, he really means more than that. He uses that number. Why he really uses that number, we don't know, unless there's supposed to be some cryptic reference in the number 12, and this may well be, to the fact that, the 12 tribes of Israel certainly won't help me. I came to be their Messiah, and they're going to crucify me. So the 12 tribes of Israel won't help, but 12 legions of angels could help and would help if I would only but ask. That would probably be a best guess why he uses 12. But that doesn't mean there are only 100,000 angels there in heaven. He's got millions and millions and millions of them. But he probably uses that with direct reference to 6,000 in a Roman legion. You multiply it out, and there's what you have. Then if you go over to Mark chapter 5, verses 9 and 15, 2 other occasions where this term legion occurs. He asked him, "What is thy name?" And he said, "My name is Legion, for we are many." They come to Jesus and see him that was possessed with the demon and had the legion sitting clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. Well, it would probably be a little difficult to press the issue that this man had 6,000 and only 6,000 demons in him. Maybe he just means a large number. Whether he means 3,000, 100, 500, I guess I would say it'd be a little difficult to press the issue here that he has direct reference to a Roman legion, which must mean at this time that we have 6,000 demons in this man. And then over in Luke chapter 8 and verse 30, you really don't need to turn there, it's the same account. Luke 8:30, the same account as Mark chapter 5. So we have 3 times there as demons, once as angels, never as a Roman force, but probably used in reference to Roman forces in Matthew 26 and verse 53. So that's what a legion was all about. That was the top of the army division with 6,000 men. Okay? The legion was divided into 10 cohorts. So secondly, we come to the division known as the cohort, which would mean there were 600 soldiers per cohort. 10 cohorts with 600 soldiers each makes up 6,000 men, which makes up a legion. You see, our armed forces are divided like that. You add all of this up, and then they equal whatever the largest group is. There were probably 5 of these stationed in Palestine. No legion, that's a big group, 6,000. Probably as many as 5 cohorts in Palestine at or near Caesarea. Now, if you've got 1 million people as a population in Palestine, and I'm not saying that many now will come to population of Palestine before too long, though, but let's just say 1 million people there, then having a couple of thousand soldiers is really not that many people. So we don't have legions, but we do have cohorts here. The KJV, it's always translated band, B-A-N-D, a band of soldiers. It's always translated band. The NIV is, well, inconsistent, to tell you the honest truth. They give us such things as company, regiment, troop, detachment, things of this nature. So at least the King James is consistent in that it always will give us this cohort as band. The NIV gives us company, regiment, troop, and detachment, which then obscures the fact that we're talking about the self-same term, of course. The NASB is the best here. It generally gives cohort. But in all places but one, it gives battalion in the margin, trying to, make comparable what was true then with what's true now. Although, how many of us know how many people's in a battalion, though? Unless you've been in the Army, you might know. So battalion, cohort, regiment, detachment, I guess I'd be lost on all of them. What we need is a number in there, maybe a word, maybe a transliteration, maybe the self-same term found consistently throughout, and then a footnote or something of a number to let us know how many we have. Maybe one cohort stationed in Jerusalem. That would give us maybe 6 total in Palestine. 5 in Palestine at or near Caesarea. Definitely 1 in Jerusalem. Probably only 1 in Jerusalem. That means 600 soldiers, Roman soldiers, were permanently stationed in Jerusalem. Of course, they resided in the fortress of Antonia, built by Herod the Great. And who was their leader? Claudius Lysias, according to the book of Acts. Claudius Lysias was the leader of the Jerusalem cohort. And you see, that's a little interesting because it kind of lets you know how many soldiers are there for immediate use in Jerusalem at all times. About 600 men would be available. Okay, let's go over some references here. I don't know that we need to turn to all. I've got Matthew 27, 27. I guess we can flip through a few of these here. Matthew 27:27. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the common hall. Now see, we've discussed that term governor before. It's used in a loose sense here. We haven't discussed common hall. We'll probably be back to that later. And gathered unto him the whole band. Now, of soldiers is added there. That's not in the text. Of soldiers is added. Gathered unto him the whole cohort. Or we should understand, gathered unto him all of the 600 soldiers. Unless someone was in the restroom or something. But I mean, we chiefly have all of these men together. Then Mark 15:16. The soldiers led him away into the hall called the Praetorium, and they called together the whole band. This is 600 men for Jesus' trial now. This is very, very unique, interesting to have this many men called together for one man's trial. 600 men. John 18, verses 3 and 12. Judas then, having received a band, and this is a technical term, a cohort. We have a band and then supplied of men. All of this is so interesting, but it is so involved. That's why we're spending so much time on this, because look what he goes on to say. Judas, we know this is going to be the betrayal now in the Garden of the Olive Press, we call Gethsemane. Judas then, having received 600 Roman soldiers and, now this is and, officers from the chief priests and Pharisees. These would be different people and a different group of men here. Officers from the chief priests. Now how many high priests were there though in Israel? One. We keep running into this problem now. I mentioned it over there in Luke, what was that, chapter 3. We keep running into this problem of chief priests, plural. The chief priest, that's just another way of saying the high priest. You've only got one, but it's always plural here. We'll have to deal with that later on. Cometh thither with lanterns and torches and weapons. 600 Roman soldiers, plus the officers sent out from the chief priests and Pharisees, come with lanterns, torches, and weapons. And of course, Jesus kind of makes mockery. He said, well, what do you bring all these men? He said, I taught with you daily, verse 20, the temple, the synagogue. He said, in secret, I've said nothing. You know, why bring this whole group and then drag him here before Annas and Caiaphas and go through all of this? Why not just arrest him at another time? Well, there are reasons behind all of that. And then we'll get out of the Gospels and get over into Acts 10:1. There was a certain man in Caesarea. Now, how do you like that? Called Cornelius, a centurion, we'll be to that term later on, of the cohort, called the Italian. And then they supplied for us band, or cohort. Now you know a lot about this verse now. Not only do you know the spiritual story of the conversion of Cornelius and his household, but you know why he's up there in Caesarea. That's the residence of the prefect, the Roman prefect, in Palestine. So you know what he's doing up there. He must be a part of these 5 cohorts that are up there. And he's called a centurion, and he was over a cohort that was called the Italian cohort. That must mean they're Romans, because that must mean they come from Italy. Chapter 21 and verse 31. Here we get into some of our more important occurrences. Acts chapter 21 and verse 31. Now here Paul is just about to be pulled apart, the mob at Jerusalem. And as they went about to kill him, tidings came unto the chief captain, we'll find out his name later as Claudius Lysias, of the cohort, that all Jerusalem was in an uproar, who immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down unto them. And when they saw the chief captain and the soldiers, they left beating Paul and the chief captain and so forth. We'll be back to that term here in a moment. And then finally, with this term cohort, in 27:1, this was another man that befriended the Apostle Paul. When it was determined that we, you know about the we sections in Luke, he must have joined company again now, should sail into Italy, and we've traced this on maps in the book of Acts studies. They delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus. Well, he's not around anymore, so it just means the Caesars, which probably imperial would be the best translation, a centurion of the imperial cohort. Now we have one so far in chapter 10 and verse 1 called the Italian cohort. Now we have one called the imperial cohort. So that lets us know that the cohorts evidently all went individually by distinctive titles. What they all were we don't know, but here we know two. One called the Italian cohort, one called the imperial cohort. And probably the latter of those, chapter 27 and verse 1, would be the more elite of the two. The imperial, that means right under the emperor himself. The other is just the Italian. Well, probably all of them came from Italy. So there's a cohort. We've got 600 soldiers, 10 of these comprising a legion. Then the cohort is divided. We're into our third group now. The cohort's divided into 3 maniples. M-A-N-I-P-L-E-S, which would give us 200 soldiers in each. 3 of these, 200 soldiers in each, would make up one cohort of 600 soldiers, which would give us 30 maniples per legion. And what do we have to say about this? Absolutely nothing, because it doesn't appear in the New Testament. So, moving onwardly, and you're probably not very familiar with that term anyway, but it doesn't occur in the New Testament. We have, in the 4th place, each maniple is divided into 2 centuries of 100 men each. You're getting this breakdown. 6,000 men in a legion, 600 in a cohort. 10 of those make up the 6,000 of a legion. 3 maniples into a cohort of 200 soldiers each make up the 600 soldiers of a cohort, which means we have 30 in a legion. Which means we have 60 centuries in a legion of 100 soldiers each. What do we have to say about this? It, like maniples, never mentioned in the New Testament. Well, we have several things to say, because although it's not mentioned, the leader of the group is mentioned, and that's the familiar centurion. The division century is never mentioned, but the leader is mentioned oftentimes. The centurion was kind of a lowly fella, because he controlled a century, and it took several of these to make up a maniple, and several of those to make up a cohort, and several of those to make up a legion. So he's way down the list as far as Roman officers are concerned. A centurion, of course, would be the commander of 100 men, as the name implies. 16 times centurion appears in the New Testament. 16 times. Centurion, which always would imply a century, obviously, appears in the New Testament, and we can divide that up into 13 of those occasions is the self-same Greek term, and the 3 extra are not Greek. What language are they? Latin, and so where are they found? Mark. The 3 that are in Latin are found in Mark. The 13 that are Greek are found in other places. Centurions. Okay, there are 4 specific ones that are mentioned. Let's go over some scriptures here together. Let's turn back. The earliest appearance would be Matthew chapter 8. Here we have an unnamed centurion. Matthew chapter 8, verses 5 through 13, which is the same as Luke 7, verses 2 through 6. So we'll cover these scriptures just together. Matthew 8, 5 through 13, which is the same as Luke 7, verses 2 through 6. There are four chief ones in the New Testament. By the way, before we look at all of them, can you think who are the four? Who are the four centurions of any importance in the New Testament? I mean, we've already looked at some of them now. Don't disappoint me on Acts 10:1 and Acts 27:1. Cornelius. Who was 27:1? Two of them we know their names. We just read in Acts 27:1. Julius. Julius was a centurion. I'm giving you a hint. Here's one man. He's an unnamed one, but he's the one who comes and wants his sick servant healed. Here in Matthew 8, there's another one. Okay, the one there at Jesus' crucifixion. Those are the four ones of any note in the New Testament. So they're occurring several times. That's noteworthy for them to occur that often. When Jesus was entered into Capernaum, remember where Capernaum is on the map? Way up north of the Sea of Galilee. I don't mean way past the sea, I mean on the northern shore, but way up north. There came unto him a centurion. Jesus is in Capernaum. You have to kind of think about all this, okay? A centurion is coming unto him, okay? He's got 100 men under him. Okay, probably those 100 men are somewhere nearby. I mean, within a reasonable distance for him to travel in order to get here to Capernaum. And we've already discussed about how many cohorts there probably were in Palestine and how many centuries make up the cohorts, and they're at Caesarea. There's one cohort probably down at Jerusalem. The other 5 are at Caesarea or somewhere nearabouts. So this man may have had to travel a little way, or he may have been up there for business or for some other reason in Capernaum. You have to put all these details in your mind. Then you won't just read through here and say, well, a centurion. You don't know anything about a centurion. Where are they stationed? What's this man doing up in Capernaum? Is there anything odd or unusual about that? Well, most people, of course, would never even pause to consider that. Saying, Lord, my servant lieth at home, sick of the palsy and grievously tormented. Jesus saith unto him, I will come and heal him. Now, haven't you heard messages preached on this little verse here? The centurion answered and said, Lord, I am not worthy that thou shouldest come under my roof, but speak the word only, and my servant shall be healed. For I am a man under authority. And what you generally have majored upon is the second part, having soldiers under me. And then you get this picture of this fantastic centurion that just controlled the Roman Empire. Well, notice what he first said, I'm a man under authority. He's under the maniples, he's under the cohorts, and he's under the legions, and they are under the emperor. So he's way down at the bottom, but he does have 100 men underneath him. I am a man under authority. That's the first thing he says, because that's the most important. I'm way down at the bottom of the totem pole. But I've got a couple of men under me. And I say to this man, go, and he goeth. To another, come, he comes. To my slave, do this, and he does it. And when Jesus heard it, he marveled, and said to them that followed, Verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. And of course, he's basing that upon this little statement in the end of verse 8, but speak the word only. I mean, you can get a good message out of that. There's a good message there. Can we depend totally on God's word? Not asking for triple confirmation. Will you confirm this, Lord, by the arrangement of the clouds outside today? What does the word of God teach us? What's the Lord leading us? We saying, Lord, just speak the word and I will obey your word. You're not looking for, now, if there are 4 car accidents on the way to work today, I know he wants me to wait 4 months before I move. Well, you can't base things on something like that, but you know people will go out, they'll play Russian roulette with the Bible or look for clouds like a child in the sky and arrange. Now, does it spell, what is that, September that it's spelling? Or is it Leo the lion? That puts me in the right month right there. Speak the word only. Of course, you get a faith and a healing message out of this. And according to James 5, that's certainly valid. The prayer of faith will heal the sick and the Lord will raise him up. And notice what he said, Verily I say unto you, I have not found so great a faith, no, not among you privileged people who have been brought up with the law of Moses and the teaching of the prophets. This man, I mean, can you get a sermon out of that? What you can get out of that is how just something about the person's personality. This man just seemed to be able to comprehend things where you just brought up, these Jews brought up in this religious environment, and it's done them no good at all. I'm just thinking how some people seem to think and operate and work, and I don't know, you almost end up, I guess for some people, out of the realm of the supernatural, because you'd say, well, it looks like that man almost was born with that type of personality, where he could just sensibly deduce these things and say, I am a man under authority, I have men under me, they do what I say, you are a man of authority, that's the implication, and the diseases and demons will obey you. And that's very interesting. He had no religious upbringing there. He had no religious training or upbringing at all. He had been shipped in at some time, probably a few months or a year or two at the most prior to this, because they did rotate back and forth between going back to Italy and staying out on the frontier, as it were. Shipped into Palestine a few months or a few years previous to this, and then he's going to be back out of there again. He's a Roman. A centurion is a Roman, not a Jew. He's always a Roman. He's going to be back in Italy, so he comes in, and where is he probably stationed at or near Caesarea? How many times does Jesus teach in Caesarea? We don't have any references at all to him teaching in Caesarea. You see the point then. You get a lot of messages out of this. The more you know of the historical, the political, here I go, I'm going to harp it again. The more you know about that, the better you'll be able to interpret the New Testament then. The more complete it will be. It'll be more complete than what you've had before whenever you read through this. And then you pause at centurion. And you think about what you're reading. You think about what's going on there. You see how this man evidently could just latch hold to Jesus and his teaching and not let loose. Matthew 27:54. The graves were opened. Bodies of the saints which slept arose, came out of the graves after his resurrection, went into the holy city and appeared unto many. And now when the centurion and they that were with him watching Jesus saw the earthquake and those things that were done, they feared greatly, saying, truly this was the Son of God. Another centurion. These Roman guys had something going for them. Of course, this man almost waited too late to recognize who the Messiah was. That other centurion was a step up on him. This is the same as Luke 23:47. And it's the same as the 3 Latin times of Mark. Mark 15, verses 39 through 45. 16 times it appears. 13 as a Greek term in Matthew, Luke, and the book of Acts. And 3 as a Latin term, all 3 in Mark chapter 15, verses 39 to 45, all dealing with the same centurion, all dealing with the same case of the crucifixion of Jesus. So there we have the 2 important ones in the Gospels. One who expresses a glimmer of faith after the crucifixion, and one who expresses much faith, great faith, Jesus said, prior to the Passion experience. Then Acts chapter 10, of course the whole chapter here, but chapter 10 and verse 1, we have Cornelius. Cornelius. Probably the most famous of the centurions in the Bible. We have a whole chapter, plus the rehearsing of the chapter in the next chapter, the 11th chapter of Acts, all of this one man. So he's called a centurion of the Italian band in verse 1. Then in verse 22, they said Cornelius the centurion. So we have him as centurion again there. Then over in chapter 21:32, which I think we read a few moments ago, no names given here, so we don't count this as one of the 4 really important ones. Whenever Paul is being pulled apart, they took soldiers and centurions, plural. Well, if there's a cohort stationed at Antonia, we'd probably, and since we've got 600 men there and 6 centuries make that up, we probably have at least 6 centurions stationed in Jerusalem. Each centurion, over a century, 6 of those making up a cohort. So probably we have 6 centurions who are in Jerusalem. If not less or more, we really don't know. But approximately 6 centurions. Chapter 22. You could count this as another of the important ones, but he's not that important. He's just one of those other centurions that we just discussed. Verse 25. Paul said to the centurion that stood by him, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that's a Roman and uncondemned?" And when the centurion heard that, he went and told Lysias. Chapter 23. And verse 17. Where are we in chapter 23 and verse 17? What city are we in? What part of Palestine? Jerusalem? Don't we end up in Caesarea because he has his plot for his life? Okay. So we must have centurions stationed here in Jerusalem. We see it from verse 17 again. Paul called one of the centurions, one of maybe 6, at the fortress of Antonia, where Paul, no doubt, was stationed or captured or imprisoned. Said, "Bring this man to Lysias." And then verse 23. And he called unto him 2 centurions and said, "Make ready these soldiers." 2 centurions. Well, we know we have 2 now. We probably have 6 or so in Jerusalem. Chapter 24 and verse 23. Now we're at Caesarea. Now we have many centurions because we have several cohorts here. He commanded a centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty. That means that Paul was imprisoned, or he was watched over by a man and his 100 soldiers underneath him. 101 men to watch Paul. Then we get over into chapter 27, and we're over to Julius, verses 1, 6, 11, 31, and 43. And then we have finally chapter 28 and verse 16. When we came to Rome, the centurion delivered the prisoners to the captain of the guard, and Paul was allowed to dwell by himself with a soldier that kept him. Okay, still discussing under Roman divisions, but we're through with the technical terms for those 4 categories. Let's come in conclusion here to the term captain. Literally, the term means a ruler over 1,000 men, which meant a captain was over 10 centuries, therefore over 10 centurions. A captain literally means ruler of 1,000. 10 centuries of 100 men each make up 1,000. 10 centurions over those makes the captain in charge of 10 centuries, and therefore 10 centurions. However, you see we're going to run into a little problem here. I've said that there's probably a cohort, and probably only a cohort that's stationed at Jerusalem. That's only 600 men. 6 centurions, 6 centuries, which make up a cohort, not 1,000 men. But who's their leader? Claudius, Lysias, the captain, the chief captain. Well, just like the term legion, it probably is used in a loose sense in many occasions, where it just means ruler of a large number of men. So that 1,000 may really, in this case, mean 600 men. That Claudius Lysias was a captain, not over 1,000, but maybe a captain over 606 men for the 6 centuries, and there's 6 centurions. Now he is mentioned. He's occurred many times here. Some of these times where we keep coming across the centuries, or really the centurions here in the book of Acts, and we're talking about this man. But if you'll turn over to the book of Acts, well, let's start in chapter 21, because here's where he's introduced for the first time. Chapter 21 and verse 31. As they went about to kill Paul, tidings came to the... See, it'd be too far, and it'd take too long to send tidings all the way to Caesarea to bring some of those cohorts or centuries there. That's why they have some station in Antonia. Tidings came unto the chief captain, Claudius Lysias, of the band, or of the cohort, 600 men, not 1,000, although that's the technical meaning of the term, that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. Okay, and you're going to see him just time and time and time again as we go along. Verse 37, as Paul was led into the, shouldn't be castle, but fortress. It's not a castle. We think of a Scottish or an English medieval castle, but a fortress. And you've seen pictures and slides of that. He said unto the chief captain. But then we have to turn to chapter 23 to get this man's name. He's the man throughout chapters 21, 22, and 23. And then he kind of passes off the scene. We have one main man who's the captain in the New Testament. He wrote a letter after this manner, Claudius Lysias, unto the most excellent prefect, governor, just using it in a loose sense because Felix was a prefect. Claudius Lysias, the chief captain of the cohort at Jerusalem, unto the most excellent prefect, who later was referred to as a procurator, who could at any time be loosely referred to as a governor, Felix sendeth greetings. So now you know all the technicalities of that little verse. I think we've said before that the Caesarean prefect temporarily lived at Jerusalem during the great annual pilgrimages, obviously to keep order, more or less as a figurehead, but he brought cohorts with him whenever he came, because the Jews were notoriously a rowdy group of people. That answers the question, as you have already correctly guessed earlier, why Pontius Pilate, who was a prefect stationed at Caesarea, was present during Jesus' trial and crucifixion. And of course that also would explain then why in Paul's case they have to take him from Jerusalem to Caesarea. You see, in Jesus' case they don't. Why? The prefect is there. Why? Because it's one of the three great annual feasts or festivals or pilgrimages to Jerusalem. That's Passover. During Paul's time, we're not talking about that. We have a delay after this feast that Paul has gone back to, probably Pentecost here, which is another of the three great annual feasts there, Tabernacles, Pentecost, and Passover. But now we're later than that. So remember we're here, the end of chapter 23. Paul is shipped off to Caesarea. Verse 33, who when they had come to Caesarea delivered the epistle to the governor and presented Paul also before him. Not to the governor really, but to the prefect here. When the prefect had read the letter, he asked of what province he was. When he understood that was of Cilicia, he said, I will hear thee when your accusers are come. So you might want to note Matthew 27:27 with Mark 15:16 with Acts 23:33. Those verses inform us of the fact that during Jesus' trial, he doesn't have to be shipped off to Caesarea because the prefect is in residence, temporary residence there. In Paul's case, we have another matter. Because we don't have one of the three great annual pilgrimages taking place, Paul is shipped off from Jerusalem to Caesarea. Not only because his life is in danger there, I mean, that's the surface meaning, that's what you'd read into that right away, but he's going to have to end up there sooner or later anyway. Unless you hold him in Jerusalem long enough, and that may have been what Claudius Lysias intended to do, until the next feast comes along, whenever the Roman prefect would come up, down we would say, but the Jews would say up from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Okay, a couple of more points and we'll be through. At Caesarea, there was a hall for judgment or for judicial proceedings that was in Herod's palace. Now, I've given you this verse before, and I said you didn't have to look it up then because we would look it up in the future, and the present is now the future. That's Acts 23 and verse 35. Who built all of the buildings there at Caesarea? Herod the Great. Herod built his large palace there. Well, that doesn't just go into rubbish as soon as he dies. The Romans take that over and make it headquarters for the prefects. So while we're here in this chapter, verse 35, I will hear thee when your accusers are come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. Now, the reason I gave you this verse, it was just a reference to the fact that Herod the Great's name appears here. Remember, we looked at all the places where Herod means Philip or where Herod means Antipas, or where it mostly does, or where Herod means Herod the Great. And here's one of those way over in the book of Acts references, not to Herod Antipas, but to Herod the Great, kept in Herod's judgment hall. So probably you have some type of temporary restraint, prison, jail, whatever you want to call it, for the accused, and it was considered the judgment hall because judgment would be carried out there. Furthermore, we see that it had a judgment seat in the judgment hall, according to Acts 25 and verse 6. A judgment seat in the judgment hall of Herod's palace in Caesarea. When he had tarried among them more than 10 days, he went down unto Caesarea, and the next day sitting on the judgment seat, some type of bench or chair that was just for this purpose of sitting as a judge over a case, commanded Paul to be brought. And then finally, we also have an audience chamber. Acts 25:23. We probably have something here of an audience chamber, maybe connected, evidently connected, to the judgment hall. On the morrow when Agrippa, now see, there's someone we've not discussed yet, and will be to him in the future, was come. And Bernice, we haven't discussed her, and that's an interesting case, Agrippa and Bernice. With great pomp, and was entered into the place of hearing. Well, that could be judgment hall, but probably we have room for spectators or an audience that I think most people refer to as an audience chamber that may be, of course, attached to this. With the chief captains and principal men of the city, at Festus' commandment, Paul was brought forth.